Welcome to the Leadership Variations Unfiltered podcast, where each limited run series tackles the leadership problems no one is naming, how women in STEM actually succeed, why leadership fads always fail, and where talent strategy breaks down when the stakes are the highest. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Today, I am so excited to move forward with our next guest for the Cracking the Code Women in STEM podcast. I am so pleased to have Dr. Natalie Crawford, a veterinary pathologist and operations executive with 20 years of leadership in STEM organizations across animal health, pharmaceutical, and medical devices. Boy, that is a mouthful. She has held senior roles at Covance and W.L. Gore and Associates, combining scientific, operational, and DE&I leadership. Now she brings that wonderful blend of scientific rigor and operational leadership into her next chapter of her life, launching a coaching practice, leading hospital operations, and completing her executive coaching certification at Georgetown, which is an amazing program. Dr. Crawford holds a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine, that's a DVM, from Virginia Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine, and a master's in veterinary pathology from Virginia Tech, and her BS in animal science from the University of Delaware. Did I do that okay, Natalie?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Oh, we are so pleased to have you. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, in terms of where you are now, if you look across your career and think, I've talked to a lot of women in STEM and found that sometimes the path in leadership, the most powerful parts of someone's leadership journey, you don't see them on the resume. So just in terms of your leadership, can you think of something that you built or influenced that others wouldn't see on your resume?
That's interesting. First of all, thank you for having me, Amy. I really do appreciate it. It's an honor to be here today. Something that you wouldn't see on my resume. So something that's kind of a funny thing. I like to joke. I try to be a funny person. That's kind of a side of me that not everyone gets to see. But I always tell people I became a vet because I didn't like people. I wanted to work with animals. I didn't want to work with people. However, obviously, every animal comes with a person. And I think the thing that doesn't show on my resume is that I am a very good people person. And I think it's something that comes up very often within STEM, within scientists, technical backgrounds, is women and men don't tend to always have the best relationship skills, meaning relating to people. We can tend to be awkward, those type of things. And so something that doesn't show up on my resume is probably my ability to relate to others, my ability to connect with others, my want to connect with others. I think I put that before a lot of things often, and we can come back to that at other points. But that's super important to me, to make sure whoever I'm interacting with feels like they have a space, they have a voice, and they also are heard. They're just as valuable and as important as anyone else in the room. So that's probably something that doesn't show up on my resume, because you see a lot of the technical things, you see a lot of the things that have been accomplished, but they often don't talk about the people side of things that have been accomplished in the background.
And that's interesting that you say that, because we often see in my work with coaching, I often see that as a skill that we work on to really help develop folks. And surprisingly, I have talked to a lot of leaders like yourself that really put the people skills first. Can you think of a time or an example when these skills really helped you in your job or in your leadership?
I've been in multiple situations where things have just been, I would say, hard and difficult, right? And you have a situation where you know what's going to happen is probably not the best outcome, meaning that people are going to be upset, people are going to be sad, people are going to be disappointed.
Right.
I think really in those situations, being sure to put the people aspect first and recognizing that everyone's going to be at a different place is really important. And in doing that and letting people see that you too can connect and relate, it doesn't make it easier that you're going to have something difficult, but it makes it relatable and it makes them feel like they have someone connecting. There's been so many different situations. I mean, I think one thing that you mentioned, I think you mentioned the bio, but I did have a stint in a time where I was a DE&I leader in a company, which, as being a veterinarian and moving into that, right, I really had to engage with people, obviously, in some of the most difficult conversations and topics. What I found is I use the same technique I use in my science and my background, is that I use facts and I use relationship with people to talk those difficult conversations. those can get very emotional. But when we're able to bring it back to like, again, what are the facts? What are we really here to talk about? And treating people with respect and dignity, then it's still the same conversation you may have about a scientific topic, right? So trying to use those skills in any situation does tend to work.
Thank you for that. One of the things our listeners won't know is that Natalie and I had the amazing opportunity to work together when Natalie was working in DE&I at WL Gore and Associates, and she did some incredibly amazing things. I wonder if you could tell us, in using these skills or anything else, what was the most meaningful in really moving out of what had been a core skill area and moving into this. What was the most memorable or even the most challenging in shifting around your skill sets?
So I was really good with obviously the relating to people part of it, but it was the moving from leading in a space where I was the expert. And so I could walk in a room from a scientific standpoint. I knew more than most people in the room at any given day, right? Where you're walking into something like DE&I, there's no way you'll ever know all of the components of DE&I because everyone brings a different story, a different narrative, a different background. And so being able to lead in the space where you're an expert versus leading in the space where you're not the expert, and often you too are still learning in the space, is very different. So I think that was one of the largest challenges for me. The other was leading in a space that was a small team space, very localized space, to leading in a global space. To take global and DE&I, put all those together and learning how to do both of those at the same time was quite a challenge. But again, leaning into my ability to relate to people, and even when I made a mistake or I messed up, just asking for some grace and giving the same to others is really what helped me get through it. But I do think that's often the biggest jump, is when you're moving from being an expert and a leader into leading in, I'm going to say, an area where you're not the expert anymore. And add on top of that complexity and all of that, it does take a different usage of your skill set, I would say.
That's so interesting also, because I think when in general, subject matter experts jump from their subject matter expertise, whether it's women in STEM or just STEM in general, into being a leader in general, I typically see that there's that same experience in general, because a lot of people don't realize that managing a group of folks early on in their career, managing a group, is having a leadership set of skills is very different than, being in your subject matter expertise. And I think, getting promoted into that, going from doing what you do so well to leading folks doing what they do so well is really different. Do you remember making that shift?
I do. I think there's two big things that came up for me. One of the biggest things I had to overcome was the identity crisis piece, right?
Wow.
The identity of, I'm a vet, I'm a veterinary pathologist. What am I doing moving into a space where, I'm moving into DE&I, right? Like, those seem to be two totally different areas, right? Regardless of my background, right? And I say cultural background and everything else. I mean, those are really two very different areas of expertise. So for me, I had to remind myself that regardless of where I move to, what I'm leading in, I will always be a vet. I'll always be a veterinary pathologist, and no one can take that away from me. So it's that identity thing. That is a true deep identity that I have, is being a scientist, being in STEM. And so moving into something else is one thing that I had to do. The other, I think, was around just trying to recognize like what support I needed was going to be different. And so moving from, again, you said kind of managing and leading a small group, and the topics and issues that I had to deal with there were going to be very different than the ones I'm going to be dealing with in this now global situation where I'm interacting with the executives, the CEO and others, right? And having to have conversations. So the group that I now am able to talk with and share with and have support me becomes very different, and it becomes smaller. And so that was the other piece I had to work through and learn, is how to adjust to being able to be open with everyone and share and feel connected to everyone, where there were some things I couldn't share with others, and there's some things I couldn't talk over with others. And so that was a shift as well, because I am a huge people person, making sure that people didn't feel like I felt like I was now promoted, now I can't talk to you. It's not that at all. It's just more, I have some new responsibilities, right, that I can't share or I can't discuss. And that is a challenge, I think, for a leader too. Whenever you're promoted, you want to keep those connections with others, but you want to make sure that you are changing in the appropriate way, but they don't feel like there's some now slight, right? And I'm sure that happens with many people, and it makes you feel like you're more isolated and you don't have as many people that you can connect with.
Absolutely. How did you for yourself manage that in your head, making that shift? Did you find certain challengers or?
Yeah, I did. I actually ended up, it was super important to have that board of directors, right? So that group that you actually can trust. And I made sure that I was very specific. I actually went to certain people and actually said, I want you as this, I need you for this, and was very clear with people on that. The other piece is that was my first experience with coaching. So I had never been coached before, I had never had a coach before. I actually went out and got my own coach. So I got my own coach when I moved into that role because I was like, I need it. I need the support. I need someone that is going to challenge me and someone that's going to push me. And so that was really important as well. And so that was my first exposure to coaching. Hence, years later, now being a coach, one of the big things that's important for me is as I talk to people, there's so many people that don't get the opportunity to be coached and so many people that need it and are not afforded it. And it's just such a great opportunity to give someone a space to feel like they can be challenged in a safe space. They can be heard. And I use the word held sometimes, right? But like held, like you are moving into a space that is complex and new, and you're going to fail and you're going to mess up. And you need someone that's going to help you realize where you've messed up and what you own, and then what other things other people might own. And so coaching came into my life during that period as well and was a huge reason that I was able to be successful.
I love that you talked about coaching. Obviously, I am biased because I do the executive coaching and I believe so strongly in using coaching as an opportunity to shift behavior. Behavior doesn't shift on its own, especially if you don't have the skills that you're trying to build.
Exactly.
But not everybody, as you mentioned, not everybody is afforded the opportunity. In certain cases, the company is willing to pay. But if the company doesn't offer that to you, so you're a fan of saying to someone, hey, go out and get
Absolutely.
a coach. What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe not afforded that opportunity? How do you recommend somebody go out and find a coach that meets their needs?
Yeah, first I would say go back and advocate for yourself, right? Don't take no for an answer the first time.
Yes.
Go back and advocate for yourself, whatever that looks like, putting together a proposal, write up a value statement, whatever that looks like, but go back and promote and advocate for yourself first. If there's no again, then yes, searching around to see, if there's someone out there that could be a coach. Recognizing too that, coaching can be an investment and you should look at it as an investment. But there are plenty of coaches out there that also want to offer and help people on a pro bono basis as well, right? So I think you should see it as an investment and be willing to pay. But also there are people that are willing to do pro bono coaching to help people get started as well. So I think it's just something to be aware of. But yeah, I think I spent too many years not advocating for myself, not making sure I was okay and that I had the support I need. So I'm a huge advocate. If you need it and you're not getting it, then go get it.
Nice. Thank you for that. And I
Yep.
agree with you, by the way, wholeheartedly. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to a big one. Challenges as a woman in the STEM industry. And for you, especially, challenges as a woman of color. What makes it so incredibly, it adds that layer, just the numbers of women in STEM are so incredibly low. I worked in many STEM industries and the numbers are sad, but women of color, it's even more difficult. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I spent a large period of my time. I mean, you mentioned Gore. I spent a large period of my time at Gore. And I would say at Gore, there was not an issue with women in STEM. So women in general. So I wouldn't even put it in the category of women. I think my first exposure, and I would even say even in vet school, the change as I was coming through vet school, where it had been more male dominated, there were more women in my class than there were men. And so I think for me, I've not experienced as much of that lack of women in STEM and women in science, both because I think as I've started growing in my career, I've been in places where there's been a lot of women. I think what I've always experienced, vet school and beyond, is women of color in STEM, right? And so I think that has always been, I would say, not a challenge, but it definitely is something that comes up. I think in any instance, when you are questioning yourself as a new leader, you're already questioning yourself, or am I doing the right thing? As a person of color in any situation, you're always questioning yourself, am I being seen in the way I want to be seen? Am I being perceived in the way, right? So I think it's that added layer of how you're being perceived. And I think for me, it a lot goes back to identity. And I mentioned that before. I have an identity that I hold very tightly, right? And it's identity that I am a veterinary pathologist, regardless of if I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm a person of color. And that's what I want to be seen as. I don't necessarily want to be seen as I am the Black veterinary pathologist, right? And so it does take that added piece where you do have to be able to overcome and recognize when there are things that are coming and happening because of maybe your color. But in my case, I have always tried to be in a place of I am a scientist, I'm a veterinarian, I am good at what I do, and I typically will always be the only one. I'm just used to it. I've gotten used to it. It's just something that has been since vet school. There were a few of us, 4 out of 100, right, in my class. When I was in undergrad, I think there were 3 of us, maybe in the entire college, maybe 4 in the entire college.
Wow.
In our entire college of animal science and beyond, there were probably 4, maybe 5 of us. When I was at Gore, I mean, there were very few. Like, there's always going to be a few. And I think I recently looked up the numbers. I do think there's still under 5% people of color that are veterinarians. And you go down to beyond that as pathologists and so on, even smaller amount, right? So I know I'm in a profession where I'm never going to be the majority, but I also don't consider myself the minority because that doesn't come across for me. You know what I mean? I am who I am. I try to present myself in the way that I am. And I don't want you to see me as a Black veterinary pathologist. I am a veterinary pathologist, right? I have had to go through the same things that other people have had to go through to get to where they are. Yes, with some additional hurdles, but I can't say that those hurdles have been exorbitant. They haven't been things I haven't been able to overcome. They haven't just given me additional experiences and knowledge that I can use to move forward. I think the reason why it comes up so much now is because of our environment, right? And the environment we live in is so challenging.
Yeah.
And so does it bother me more? Does it come up more? Do I think about it more? Yes. But I still try to put myself in places where, and this is going to sound really bad, but I'm in places where I feel like I'm around people that are more like-minded and people that are educated enough in their space to realize that that is not what you see is just a small component of me, similar to what I see about you is just a small component, and we can just keep moving forward. That's where I try to put myself in those spaces and not in spaces where I'm having to prove myself over and over and over again, and consider that race is a huge component of what's going on. So easier said than done, but I am intentional because I love to keep my peace and I will keep my peace. And I'm not going to put myself in a spot where I can't keep my peace. That's just where we are. And that is, I think, a choice that people should make. And you can get yourself in that space.
I love that you're saying that. That's why we call this the Unfiltered podcast, because people are not afraid to step up and say something like that. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
And that's why I wanted you on this podcast, so women could have an example like you to think about. And that's awesome. So let me ask you this. Is there anything that you can look back, any part of your career, where you look back at a challenge and you think about, gosh, if I could do it over again, here's something I would have done differently?
Ooh, that's a good question. What would I have done differently? There's not, Amy, and only because I've spent a lot of time in the last year, 2 years being very reflective. And so I've gone back and I've actually reflected on probably every situation in my life where I felt like I was going to do one thing and I did something different.
Right.
And in each of those situations, I actually told myself, you did the very best at the time that you did, and you moved forward from it. And you wouldn't have then hit that next milestone if you hadn't done that. So I don't regret or want to change anything. I think I was at the point for a while, and I mentioned this before when we were having kind of our intro conversation. There are times where I felt like I stayed too long in certain situations,
right.
But I had a coach really push me to say, don't say you've wasted any time anywhere, but you actually have spent time when you needed to for a certain period of time, and then you moved on. And so I'm really trying to reframe and take it from a different perspective of I stayed as long as I was supposed to in that moment with the best knowledge that I had. And I'm not going to regret or say I lost time or I wish I had done. So I can't say I regret anything. I think I regret more things like fashion mishaps and haircuts and stuff like that. than I do situations in my career.
I love that.
Feel like all of them have been for a reason. And yeah, I don't regret any of them.
I love it. Okay. One more thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to close with what I call the undeniable take. So, one truth that you'd give to the woman who is ready to lead in a senior role, but she is currently still being underestimated. So, in other words, she knows she's got it, but she still needs help cracking the code like you clearly have.
So I think one big thing is never let the feedback of others make you feel small. I feel like, I don't know if you can see, but I have that Marianne Williamson poem behind me. I often feel like people are giving us feedback because they see something like bad feedback, negative feedback, discouraging feedback, because they see something in us that they don't want to come out. And I've seen too many people, women, men, get feedback from people where I'm just like, if you wouldn't take advice from that person, then don't let them give you feedback, because we take it to heart and it actually ends up making you feel smaller, less confident than what you are. So I would say be strong and know who you are and know who to take feedback from, who not to take feedback from, and when to internalize it and really act on it. That's one thing. I think the other is you don't have to be louder to make people see what you can do. You just have to do your very best, be consistent, and try to find those people that you need to link up with that can help you get to the next level. But you don't have to be louder. You don't have to do more, because then you end up just working extra, extra hard and doing all this extra work and burning your own self out, but you're still not getting to where you want to be. It's working smarter. It's doing your very best, and it's making those connections with people. But I would say never sacrifice yourself. Don't sacrifice your values, your morals, what you really feel. Don't ever do that, because in the end, it'll come back and bite you. You really should still remain yourself. And if you have to change to get into that next spot, unless it's a change that you feel good about and you can live with, then don't make that change.
That is our mic drop moment. Thank you, Natalie Crawford. What a wonderful opportunity. We really appreciate you being with us for Cracking the Code, Women in STEM today.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled. Thanks for joining. For more unfiltered advice and tools that drive real business value, subscribe to our newsletter, connect on LinkedIn, or book a consult, because leadership development fails when we solve the wrong problems. Find all links below.